Well, we're seeing red on DJD Reloaded today, and no, that is not a figure of speech. We mean that quite literally, because if you haven't heard the news, which you should have by now, but the iconic number 8 Budweiser paint scheme is officially back, and it's going to be back on track at a late model race here pretty soon, and we've done a lot this week at Dirty Mo Media to kind of celebrate this big return. Dale Jr.'s talked about it. We had Tony Sr. in studio earlier this week to kind of reminisce on old times, and we're going to continue that today with 2 Bud Crew members. We have Barry B. Hoover, who knows a lot about the car. We've also got Jade Gurss, who knows a lot about Dale Jr. And so, as you can imagine, we have a lot of questions to ask these guys to get to those really nitty-gritty stories. So let's go ahead and get to it. Guys, I'm really excited about this because you've already been kind of reminiscing off camera and off the mic a little bit about just all of the stories that you have. But this is a little bit of a reunion. I can't believe this, but B, you said you haven't seen Jade in 20 years?
I haven't seen Jade since it's been 20
we
years.
couldn't figure it out. But
maybe Dale Jr.'s retirement party.
Do you remember that?
It's foggy. It's foggy. I had a good time. That's what it should be, but yeah, it's crazy that I haven't seen him. It's been 20 years, and I lived half of my life with him, and all of a sudden, we just go our different ways, then here we are again.
Yeah.
Just like old times.
Just like old times.
And now we get to reminisce. And like we said, this week, the big announcement that the Bud 8 paint scheme was back. Did you ever imagine Jade, that this would be back and that fans would maybe be just as excited as they are this week?
It was always a small corner in the back of my mind, but I hadn't really thought through in what scenario it would happen. So when I heard about this, I was just real excited, and it's great to see B. Since I've heard the announcement, my brain has gone haywire. I have thousands of stories suddenly coming to mind. So it's been great to kind of think back on those good old days with the Red 8 car.
Were you excited to see the paint scheme back?
It's huge. It's huge for the sport. I'm a 30-year veteran now, and that's what it takes to keep the sport going, passing the torch on, but it is huge. I never thought in a million years it would happen, but I'm loving it. I mean, I go on Twitter, and it's lit up in red.
Did you have a lot of people reach out to you when the announcement was made?
Absolutely. Are you going with Dale Jr.? Are you going to be part of the crew? What are y'all? You got your old uniforms? And I was like, no.
Would you do that if you were asked to?
Absolutely, I would.
Would you, Jade? Would you get back out there and be the publicist?
If we're talking a few races, I don't know about the full cup schedule these days, but yeah.
A few late model races.
A few late models. I could probably handle that at my age.
What was the first impression when you saw the late model?
I thought it was beautiful.
I did too. I saw Tony Jr. posted on Facebook about 5 days ago, and he posted just a red Bud car. It looked like Homestead. I was like, what's that about? And I knew something was coming, and then I saw it on Twitter. But it's beautiful. It's great.
And you two are still, involved in racing in some capacity, right? And you were kind of mentioning this too, that a lot of those crew members right now are still in the business, and you kind of credited that to 3 different people.
Yes. Our road crew consists of pretty much 7 guys, and we were, back in those days, you could test all the time. We were gone, I think the month of March, we were gone 23 days on track. But I have to say something about Dale Jr., Tony Jr., and Pops. Pops is Tony Sr. as well. That's all I know him by.
Yeah.
But you look in that garage, and all 7 of us road guys, all 7 are still working in the business 20 and 30 years later because of those 3. Dale Jr.'s driving. Tony Jr. kept us on our toes, teaching us how to be the best mechanics. And then we had we call him Pops. He was our dad, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing this still today. It's because of those 3. I'm still digging it 30 years later.
Do you think that aspect of those relationships are missing in racing today?
Very much so. Very much so. Back in those, nowadays, all the crew chiefs, a lot of them have motorhomes and all that. Tony Jr. and Tony Sr., they room together in a hotel. And you don't hear about that. We go out to eat. All of us went out to eat. When we got in fights at the racetrack, we fought together. But we were a tight-knit group, and I just don't see it like that anymore,
Yeah.
That's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The camaraderie, I would have
is.
to imagine. And
is.
Tony Sr. Was in studio this week. I'm not sure if you listened to the podcast, but they were reminiscing on some old stories. Jade, you said you had 1,000 of these things.
Oh, yes.
So I got to know, like, what's the most memorable back with the Bud 8 crew for you, if you had to narrow it down?
I mean, that's the thing. There's so many.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about that earlier. What was the highlight? And there's probably 20 that I could list. One that sticks out the most was Dale Jr. was the very first rookie to win the Winston.
Yeah.
And that came about because of a really gutsy call by Pops to change 4 tires late, and the car was just so fast. And the victory was just mind-blowing when it happened. And sadly, because of Adam Petty's death, they had decided not to use the standard victory circle for that event. So we were on a lifted stage right by the fans, right by the grandstands. And it felt like a rock concert. I mean, it was just insanity. And then Dale Sr. was always famous for not sticking around for anyone or any reason after the race. Suddenly we hear the crowd going crazy and we don't know what's going on. And suddenly he comes running up on stage and hung out with Dale Jr. I know for Dale, that was a huge moment in his life. And so it was just this, I don't know, surreal time that night. Sadly, that also was the night we learned later that the bridge, the pedestrian bridge, has collapsed. So that added kind of another weird piece to that whole event. But it was just the whole night up until we learned that was just glorious, just amazing.
Do you have a memory from a race that stands out?
That was a good one.
Yeah.
But the victory lane was really good out on the front stretch. I'm from Charlotte, so we won. We were standing out there and said, "Man, we just won $1 million." The Winston then, and we were standing out there, and I could see all my friends from high school that I haven't seen, and my family was there, and I was married at the time. My wife was there, and I said, "This is big." Went to victory lane, and we were all just celebrating, having a beer, and there comes Pops. He said, "Easy on the beers. We're working tomorrow." This was Saturday night. He said, "We were working tomorrow just because we had a test Monday." And that's, another good one we had was when February, when Dale lost his life at Daytona, we all went to work that Monday and went in the shop, and another in the 8 shop. There was none of this, no TVs, cameras. We went in there, and Dale Jr. walked in. He said, "I want to go back 4th of July. I'd like to win that race." And Pop said, "We're going to start on a car right now." And that's when we started on that Budweiser car, and people didn't know it. And that car didn't go to our fab shop. It was built right there in the 8 shop. We hung the body on it. And if we didn't go to 4th of July and kick their ass, we didn't just win it. We kicked their ass.
Yeah.
And I don't think that car ever got passed on the track for 400 miles.
And it was made that early in the season.
We started on it. The Speedway cars, Pops taught us, Tony Jr. too. If you got to love on them. If you don't, they won't love you back. And that stuck in my brain, and that's what we did. And we went down there and stole one back from Daytona that it took away from us.
Wow.
That was a good one. But we have so many, hundreds of stories behind the scenes, and a lot of them. If we ran bad, you can count on the next week. You could test anywhere you wanted to, Kentucky or wherever. If we ran bad, we were going to go to Kentucky Speedway. Dale Jr. couldn't drive. Martin Truex was going to drive. But if we ran bad, and we went there a lot, went there a whole lot. There was a lot going on during the week that the public didn't see behind the scenes, and we worked hard. It's a lot of great memories.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the car, because you got to work on the car. But Jade, I want to know how you got to be the publicist behind all of this and kind of be the brand ambassador for Budweiser and for Dale Jr.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I'll make it as short as I can. My first job in racing was in the Midwest at a track called Heartland Park. And one of the guys that I worked with there became a good friend, and he was from St. Louis. He moved back from St. Louis. Next thing I know, he's working for Budweiser in their sports marketing department. And I had been working for Mercedes-Benz at that time, and he called and he said, hey, we've signed this kid. We need somebody in Charlotte that'll be our eyes and ears, and would you be interested? And I didn't know who this young kid was, but I said, yeah, I'd be glad to talk about that. And then when he told me, it was Dale Earnhardt Jr. and DEI and all that, it was like the most sought after PR spot in the sport. And so I busted my butt to interview there with all the executives and everything. And next thing you know, I'm at the track with Dale and the team. So it was fun. And my client was Budweiser. I did not work for Dale Jr. directly, even though, he and I were together as many hours as B and the rest of the crew were together. But,
right.
That's how it happened and how it got started, and was it was exciting and exhilarating each time at the track, because it was never like we were you couldn't just walk into the track. It was always a scene in the garage, and so that stressed me out quite a bit for 8 years or however long I was on the deal, but that also made it very exciting start to finish.
I think, as a fan perspective, you got to look at all the elements that had to come together for this Bud 8 crew and for Dale Jr. to really kind of rise in popularity when he did. But what do you think the biggest factors were back then?
Well, initially, and again, I talked with Anheuser-Busch or Budweiser people about this a lot. We knew, because of who his father was, that all the racing media would cover him. We sort of knew that coming in. I could have screwed up 100 times, and we knew he would still be a big story within the racing industry. But my role was to expand that more into the general public. Honestly, we were trying to reach young men who drank beer. We wanted them to drink Budweiser. And so that became my job, was to get a Rolling Stone to come out and spend a weekend with us and do a big feature about Dale Jr. And that was almost like getting that snowball rolling. Then MTV came out, and we did a brief thing with MTV, and then we did MTV Cribs, and that was insane. If you weren't around in that era, I don't think people understand how impactful Cribs was at that time. And it was a new type of TV where they ran it 20 times in a month. You might miss it at 10 p.m., but at 2 a.m. if you're up, suddenly here's Dale Jr. for 30 minutes on MTV. And it just created this massive momentum and interest in Dale Jr. And a lot of that was prior to his father being killed. Some people say, well, it's just because his dad had such a public and horrible death. And I would say, no, it had already started before that happened. And it made my job much easier.
Yeah.
And it led to TV shows and who knows what after that. But it was really the combination of the right kid, the right driver, the right sponsor, the right team. Selfishly, I think I was the right guy, the right PR guy for that time. And so it all came together in a great mix, a beautiful mix. And so I feel very lucky to have been a part of it and, and be in the crew. If we would have ran 30th every week, it probably would have not continued to build. But because these guys were winning races and doing great things on the track, it just all continued to expand and grow. And I'm as proud of that as anything else in my career. And so I feel lucky. I feel lucky that I was a part of it.
I find it interesting too that you were kind of going after the male demographic drinking beer, but we've heard from a lot of fans, and because of the MTV and kind of how prominent MTV was back then too, you really got this younger generation, and we've heard from a lot of fans on Dirty Mo Media this week about like them getting in trouble in high school because they wore their Budweiser T-shirt and got sent home because they couldn't wear a beer brand. But I just you went after that demographic, but then you ended up really getting the younger generation too.
Yeah, and a lot of that was Budweiser's data and their research. In that era, by the time someone reached 30 years of age, they had decided on their beer. And they were going to drink that beer the rest of their lives. So the goal was to find young men 25 to 30 that we wanted them to start drinking Budweiser and to stay with that the rest of their lives. So the goal was to portray Dale Jr. in a way that was completely honest and legitimate, was that we wanted him to be a guy that the guys would want to go have a beer with. Mm-hmm. Luckily, we also had a guy that the ladies wanted to go have a beer with as well. So again, it was just all these elements just blending together perfectly, and you can't sort of fake that, or if you had a driver that wasn't genuine like Dale Jr. was, it wouldn't have worked. And we did everything we could to just let him be Dale Jr. We didn't try to force him into being a robot or anything like that. So it was huge. It was a great combo.
And you mentioned that every time you went to the track, there was a big scene. So being a part of this crew, I mean, I have to imagine that you kind of were lumped into almost this rising fame of this team at the track like that. Mm-hmm. What was that like to just be a part of that team? And when you would get to the track and knowing that you still have work, but then you've got all these fans, that's probably a lot to balance.
It was a lot. I started actually on the AT Delco car. And we won 2 championships, and I was like, yeah, we're winning. So we went to the Cup Series, had these Bud uniforms. We were young and looking good, but Pops would keep us in line on that.
Yeah.
I did. It took me a couple of years to learn that. I was like, we're rock stars. We're not on drugs. But people think we were just living this crazy life and out drinking beer and having a good time. We weren't. Of course, we would go out to eat, and have a couple of beers, but it was work. It was a lot of work. But it took me to like 01 or 02 and realize that this is a big deal. And then Jade come on board, and we didn't let anybody in our group. We were just a tight-knit group, and he took it to the next level. We didn't know what media meant. We were just race car. And it was a perfect storm in that era, what we did. And Jay was a big part of that. He took it to the next level with Budweiser. But I still look back on it today, and we were the real deal. Our whole team was a real deal. Mm-hmm. And it took me a few years to let that sink in, but we were. I wish I could go back in time and change some things.
What was it like with the other maybe teams in the garage? Like, do you think that they noticed the significant popularity that your team had over maybe them in the time period?
Oh, yeah. That wherever we'd park, you'd park by points in the garage, and the team would be like, man, we're parked beside y'all. We're not going to be able to get our car out because all the people standing behind the car. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was great. Yeah. But we had good friends. We met good friends, But they were our enemies. We were there we were taught we were going to outrun them, and that was our job to do. But they would complain because we had people, and Dale Jr. followers and cameras, they were with us. And I think most of it was where people was wanting us to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. We want to write a report, we want y'all not to win. We want to see something go wrong,
Yeah.
That happened. It was like, what's going to make Dale Jr. fail here? We want to see something. And
the fans didn't feel that way, though.
Fans didn't want that way.
Yeah, but the other teams.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have a couple of stories about that. Dale Jr. was mobbed wherever he went.
Everywhere.
And sadly, I had to be the security guard, and you can tell I'm not much of a physical specimen, so that was tough. But where Dale Jr. would get upset is when it would impact the crew or get in the way of the car. And he learned a interesting lesson from his father. When Dale Jr. thought that the crowd was enough to impact the crew, he would go sit on the back of the NASCAR hauler where all the NASCAR executives worked. Yep. And the crowd would come in and the execs couldn't come out. And Dale Jr. said, this is what is happening with our team, and we need help.
True story.
Keeping this area clear enough where our guys can do what they need to do. Yeah. And I always laughed. I always knew when he got up and he's walking to the NASCAR trailer and he would just sit down on the back and sign autographs, and the crowd would converge and just crush any chance of getting in and out of that trailer. And so we tried our best to be creative to handle the crowd. So that was one thing that Junior was insistent upon.
Do you remember that too, or did you ever feel maybe a little unprepared because you couldn't get all of your work done because of the crowds? Like, I mean, was it that significant of an issue at the track?
It could get bad. Some of these places where, especially if you go out west, when you only go one time a year, it would get crazy. And we knew Jay would take care of it. But you got to remember, that's our office. That's our workspace. And every second counts at the track. And these people, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have a job. You know, they just wanted to get a glimpse of that car and Dale Jr. But it would be a hindrance just for a little bit, and you could see the look on Tony Sr.'s face, and I think he would give it to Jade without saying anything. Look, and people understood, and I think they made it to the pub and said, listen, this is this guy's office. We don't go in your office. We got a job to do. We got a man's life in our hands. We can't leave a nut and bolt loose. And Dale Jr., he learned to work it. I didn't know who come up with that, but he sure would walk over at the NASCAR trailer, and that whole mob would follow him and let us continue our work.
I have to imagine that there were some tracks that were probably harder to navigate just with the crowds that would typically be there. What tracks do you think were the hardest?
Texas was insane, insane. And it was interesting because Dale won his first Busch race there, Busch Series now, Xfinity.
Yeah.
And then won his first Cup race there. And so it was like, you know, he couldn't have been more popular in Texas than he was. And it's hard to describe, but from the garage to the pit lane was a larger space than usual. And it would just get to the point where we would have to stop walking because the crowd was pushing in, and Junior was terrified that some young kid would get pushed over and the crowd would keep pushing. And so eventually we got NASCAR security to help us go to and from the car, to and from pit lane there at Texas. But it gave me ulcers because I felt like I was responsible, not just for Junior, but again, the people that were trying to get an autograph, you know, again, getting pushed over or knocked over. And it could turn a little, I don't want to say ugly, but it got very tense sometimes.
How big a crowd are we talking about?
Well, Texas was 150. I mean, it was huge as far as the total spectators, but for some reason the garage there in that area was just insane. I don't even know how many thousands of people they could get in there, but
thousands.
Yeah, but it was.
It would be thousands.
Yeah, it was very stressful to deal with that. You know, going in and out. You know, for qualifying or whatever, so Texas was that. But it was also great, and Junior was always. I'm trying to think of the right words. Sometimes early on, he was sort of suspicious of all the fandom because he originally thought, well, it's just because of who my dad is. Yeah. But he won in the AC Delco Busch car there, which he was proud of, and then we won, and his first Cup race was there. And his dad never won at Texas. So to Junior, he told me one time, he said, you know, I love Texas, and Texas loves me. And I always thought that was funny, that he was very proud that he felt like he had accomplished something there. And so that's what made it even more sort of frenzied. Mm-hmm. And speaking of B, that first race at Texas was on CBS TV, and the pit reporter was Ralph Shaheen.
Yep.
And I'd told Ralph about B being the same weight as Dale Jr. I'm sure you remember this. And the crews would weigh the car, and because Dale Jr. was somewhere else, B would climb in or climb on the side of the car and represent Dale Jr.'s weight. So we used to tease him that when Junior had a big meal, B better eat up tonight.
True story, yeah.
And so Ralph Shaheen told that story on that telecast. So B was like the featured crew member on that CBS TV broadcast.
That's where my career started. Boom.
Right there.
Right there.
Right there.
I mean, my grandmother, grandfather, my dad was watching.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's funny. I'll even go back on that. If you see the Dale Jr. stand-ups, that like in a 7-Eleven, whatever. So he would do a photo shoot like there in the shop, and they were saying, we're going to do some stand-ups behind here at 8 a.m. And I was like, 8 a.m.? My man's not going to be here at 8 a.m. So I actually, those stand-ups, 90% of them are me with his head on it.
Really?
They actually did a few. You might know. But they did a few. I was married then. I had a wedding ring on. They produced something, and I had a wedding ring on. And they were like, "Yeah, we got to get that.
We got to Photoshop that."
Off of there. My man wouldn't show up at 8 o'clock anymore. So I'd fill in, same uniform, but it worked. It worked for us, being the weight and all that. You didn't have to have him at the car every second of the day because he was busy, but. We'll go back on the crowd at Texas. It gets so bad even when he was coming, when we would push the car to go get fuel or push a car to pit road to get for qualify, thousands of people. So we'd have whistles, and everybody would carry a whistle in a pocket. We'd blow the whistle, and you would look, and it looked like a wave of people, and we would just cut right through them as car officials. And it got really bad. Very appreciated for it. But it was very, very, very crowded, and people would come up, pat on the car, and be like, no, yeah, let's go win, man.
Don't touch anything.
Yeah. But that's just how it was back then.
Did NASCAR eventually step in and help with that?
I do give them credit.
Yeah.
The first couple years were really rough, but I do give NASCAR credit for hiring a more active security detail that began to appreciate how difficult it was, not just for the drivers, but for teams and all of that. So I give NASCAR credit for, eventually solving that issue somewhat.
I think the thing they come out with was the hot pass. You could you had to have a hot pass. You couldn't be in the garage area when it was hot during qualifying, during practice, and they fixed that.
So that's where that originated.
That's where it came. We made that rule.
Nice.
Yeah, we made that rule.
Where was Mike Davis in all of this? I feel like I need to ask this question.
Well, Mike came on the scene. He's going to kill me because I don't recall which season, 2002 perhaps, was working with Jimmy Spencer. And Jimmy got really good media coverage. And I liked Mike, and I thought, well, if he can get good coverage for this guy, Jimmy Spencer, nothing against Jimmy, but he was not Dale Jr. So I thought if he can do that well with Jimmy Spencer, he could really do some good with us. And I was a one-man band for 3+ years, and I just got wore down. I told people I had a full head of hair. I had all my fingers when I started, and just wore me down, but neither of those are true. But I decided that I was going to hire Mike to come aboard with me. And that's where he got started. And then in 2006, 2007,
2004, I think.
He joined us in 2004
Yeah.
with my company, and then became an employee of Dale Jr.'s. I think it was 2007. My brain gets a little fuzzy on those dates, but that's how Mike came aboard. And at first, Junior, in that era, he didn't want any changes, or he didn't like a lot of new stuff. He was happy with what he had, and he was not happy with me that I was bringing in somebody else. And I said, "You're going to like him." He says, "I don't care. I don't like it." And so then, but once Mike came aboard, they hit it off. I mean, which was, to the public, very obvious from Mike hosting the podcast. But I also remember Mike, the very first year we went to Daytona, And the Budweiser shootout always started the Daytona Speed Weeks. And we're an hour before the Budweiser shootout, and Mike Davis is hyperventilating. He's so excited that he has to like kind of, rest against his knees or kind of sit down. And Junior was like, "Hey man, this is an exhibition. I don't know what you're getting all worked up. Wait till the Daytona 500 next week." So that was Mike's debut, was getting a little hyperventilated before the Budweiser shootout.
And now you're on a podcast company
now he invited me here, so look at us.
That's right. Let's go back to Budweiser. You actually brought some old Budweiser hats in with you. Said you have like a box of these, I guess?
You have no idea how many hats I have, because I tried to save at least one hat for every victory. I don't know if you would do the same. Yep. So I have a lot of hats from the Winston, and then they would do 4 races a year where there was $1 million bonus.
Yep.
And
no bull.
No bull.
Yeah.
Winston, no bull. And it seemed like we won that every time.
Yeah.
Talladega and all that. So I have all of those. Each hat inside has a date and the track. But a couple of these I brought just because we also did a lot of neat paint schemes. People know about the baseball paint schemes. And then this was the 2000 Olympics. Budweiser was the official beer of the U.S. Olympic team. So we ran a special paint scheme. And then this was the Budweiser. I think this is an all-star race. The Chicago All-Star Game in 2003. And then that one was one. I don't think this actually became... it's slick. Became available to the public. I think that was a prototype. That, again, I ended up with a lot of the prototypes, and I'd kind of wear those around even though people couldn't buy them. But we did a lot of really neat designs and things. So for me, I was always proud to kind of have the latest, greatest, coolest hat.
Yeah.
Got to keep the sun off of my bald head. So
and Budweiser is such a recognizable brand. And honestly, even now, you kind of go back to the Dale Jr. days. But I have to imagine that working with them and you working for them had to provide some pretty big opportunities. What do you think some of the biggest opportunities were there?
Well, I already mentioned Rolling Stone magazine, MTV. In that era, Playboy magazine was a target for them, for the young men. And Budweiser spent a lot of money on advertising on all those. So, I don't think we ever twisted arms saying, we spend X amount with the advertising. How about our race car driver? But it definitely made them more open and interested in the fact that Budweiser was a huge player, not just in motorsports, but in all sports, all walks of life. You always had that Bud logo. So again, I don't think I could have done a lot of what I had done if we had some, generic sponsor.
Yeah.
In that era. So that's, again, it's why I think it's so exciting for me to see it come back, as it was such an iconic look, such a fan favorite. To see it come back, I think, man, if people are like me, if fans are like me, the nostalgia this week has been great, been very heavy. So, and I'm sure for you
Huge.
As well.
Huge.
Yeah. A lot of good memories.
Not only from a branding standpoint, but I want to talk about performance now, B. And this was a team back in the day, like showing up at a restrictor plate track. I mean, you probably had to feel pretty good about going into that one and having the confidence level. You talk about how hard this team worked behind the scenes, but what was the confidence level back then when you would kind of get to those bigger tracks?
The bigger tracks were we started winning the speedway races. I think we won 4 in a row at Talladega, 4 in a row, and we're going to go back to one of the no bull races. If you win a certain race a year, you'd get later in the year. If you won this race, you'd get $1 million bonus, and they would pick a fan out. And if you won the race, the fan got $1 million, and they got to sit on their toolbox. And in 2004, we were at Talladega, and at that time we weren't supposed to finish second. If you win or nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's yeah. And there was about 5 to go, and it was a man and a lady, and they were sitting on a toolbox, and you could tell. I'm not saying they had a rough life. It was about 4 to go, and we were about 3rd or 4th, and that guy started moving his hat around, and I was just sitting there watching him. And one to go, we took the lead, and both of them put their heads down like that right there and won the race. And I went over and talked to him. I said, man, what's your deal? I love hearing the story. I said, what's your deal here? And that man told me, he said, I used to be a truck driver. I used to be a truck driver.
Wow.
He was 68 years old, and that took him to retirement. He won him $1 million, and that's what it's all about right there. Mm-hmm. And that's another good Speedway story we have. It's just like when we won big ones, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we were supposed to win the Speedway races. You show up, and Tony Jr., Tony Seniors, we're not here to run second. We're here to win, and it's because of all the hard work we put in those cars. Yeah, they weren't given to us, and everybody's like, y'all were cheaters. Y'all were doing this and doing that. No, we weren't. We worked on our cars, you know, and worked on them hard. Late at night, Tony Jr., he would come in on days off, and we had a guy named Jerky, Tom Ryan. He lived for Speedway racing, and he just, you know, make little gadgets for these cars, and it paid off. But we were expected to win Daytona and Talladega, no doubt.
What's the one thing that you did on a car that you're most proud of?
Wow. Just, you know what, probably preparing a car and making sure Dale Jr. wasn't hurt. You know, I did a lot of interior stuff. We did everything back then. But it's just a little, we weren't a specialty. All of us, we worked on the car head to toe. I could be in the front, I could be in the rear, I could be inside. And that helped us. You know, we all learned the car, and I don't know if there's one specific memory.
Was there anything that, being an interior guy, was there anything that Dale maybe had specific as a driver that he would ask of?
He liked it very clean in there, very clean. And when he would come to the car, he'd want his seat belts a certain way. When he'd get in, he wanted to put. He started this, most drivers didn't. He'd put his helmet and his Hans on outside of the race car. Mm-hmm. He'd have everything sitting right there perfect. Usually he wanted that where he could get it on quickly because it would go back to the crowd. He would come there. He didn't want to mess around. He wanted to get all that put on and get in the car. And he learned that, and that's how he fought the crowd off. Like, I'm getting in my office right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How big of an impact did this paint scheme make on the sport? I mean, I think we're kind of seeing that maybe a little bit this week of so many fans kind of coming back out and saying, you know, giving their best memory from that time. But I mean, I think the trajectory of it kind of changed NASCAR a little bit.
I think so. And I also think Budweiser was very aware of what we call the equity in the paint scheme. 36 weekends a year, our fans wanted to turn on the TV and see that red number 8 car. They could spot it. They knew what it was. Today, there are so many different sponsorships for each car. You tune in to see your guy, and you're not sure if he's the blue car or if he's the white car. And Budweiser didn't believe in that. They wanted you to turn on the TV and see that red paint scheme that everyone knew. And so it was, it had great equity. The irony is then he won in Daytona 2001 in July with the baseball with a white paint scheme, and then his first Daytona 500 win was with the middle car that you see there, white and red. So I always laughed that we fought so hard for that red car, and then he'd go out and win a big race in a white and red car. So that was kind of always fascinating to me. But
any particular stories with the wraps?
Well, I don't know if B would tell this story. Budweiser was sponsoring the World Series, and so they had put a paint scheme together for the World Series for the Charlotte race in October. And the Budweiser execs, we showed up on what it would have been a Friday, and it was still the red Bud car. There had been a mix-up. And I don't know if you have a crew member perspective on that, but I think you guys stayed up the night before the race.
It was actually Thursday. Because that was our load day, and they come in and said, "This car's it's the wrong color," and we all stood there and gave you that look you're looking right there. So we just worked
like,
all week. Yeah, this is not good. So you just pull an all-nighter and fix it and complain all you want to, but it's wrong. We had to fix it.
You fixed it what night?
Rewrap. on a Thursday night,
On a Thursday
and
night.
it loaded that night. And
Wow.
it sure did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That still happens today. It happens.
Does it?
It does. Yep, it happens. Yep, still happens today.
Wow.
Yep.
What do you want that 8 crew to be remembered as? Because it kind of sounds like there was the fan perspective of what y'all were doing, but then it sounds like, on the inside, as close knit as you were, it was a little bit of a different story.
It was, I wanted to realize what Tony Sr. taught us, not just to be hardworking mechanics. He taught us to be men, I noticed we went to some places, and he told me, he says, you know what my father told me? If my kids can't go in there, I'm not going in there. And that stuck with me. I had a little one at the time, and he was like, these guys are going to go out and do that. And he said, would your son be proud of you for what you're doing right now? And that stuck with me. And I want people to realize that we weren't these party rock stars flying on jets, going across the country. We were there to win races. And that was the example that was put in our head. It was second was not an option, and we were there to work and win. We weren't there to be rock stars. Yes, we wore the Budweiser uniforms, but we were there to win. It was a tight knit group, and we learned brotherhood. But Pops, outside the race car, he taught us to be men, and I love that about him.
And Tony Sr. and Dale Jr. at the time had a kind of an interesting relationship. Those two sat down in studio earlier this week to kind of reminisce on old times. But from your perspective, what was that relationship like to witness?
It was Dale Jr. He respected Pops, and I've seen Pops treat him like a dad, and I've seen Pops with his hands around Dale Jr.'s throat, when we weren't running bad, and he would talk back to us, get mad at us, but he would not talk back to Pops. And one time I had an incident, we were at a track, something else. I said, well, Pops did this, and he had me doing this, and Dale Jr. pulled me to his side. He said, you ever say that, I'm going to kick your ass. If you ever disrespect Tony Sr. again. And I just said one little word wrong.
Yeah.
But they had a father-son bond, and Dale Jr. He respected Pops, yeah.
Is that how you would describe it?
Absolutely. They were family.
They were.
Pops was his uncle. Tony Jr. was his cousin. Yeah. Even when they were small kids, Dale Jr. cheered for the Washington team, and Tony Jr. cheered for the Cowboys. And it was, like your cousins. You get along great. You love them to death, but you sure fight a lot too. And so neither of them would hold back. Particularly during the races when Dale Jr.'s emotions would go up and down. Yeah. They could fight like little kids, little cousins, but everybody had everybody's back. And So, and I agree with what B was saying about the crew. Again, part of my role was to make them seem like the coolest, hippest crew out there. And they really were. I didn't have to sort of make that up. They were all very young, but as B said earlier, they were, in all senses, a team. Us against the world kind of thing. And it made my job easy in that I could portray them as they really were, the people that they really were. So it was easier than it may seem from the outside, from my standpoint, to have crew members that we could tell great stories about or that people would be interested in learning about. Yeah. So it was good.
Seems like an interesting dynamic, like you mentioned, kind of that hip, iconic, team that you want to represent, but then also really hardworking behind the scenes. It's probably good to have that different dynamic, but it also probably has to make it hard when you need to work hard, but then you have Budweiser and you've got all these appearances that you're trying to get Dale to. What was that dynamic like?
It was rough because the number one rule was anything I set up PR-wise was never to interrupt or make an impact on the racing, on the on-track stuff. So we had to turn down a lot of really intriguing offers because Dale Jr. was at the racetrack 3 or 4 days a week and couldn't, fly off to California to shoot a TV show or something. So we were always cognizant about trying to book things based upon where we might be racing. So when we raced in Fontana, which is outside of Los Angeles, we'd book the Tonight Show or any other Los Angeles-based things just because we were there that week and we could do those before the race weekend. And so it never was a huge problem. We were very clear with people. He would love to do it. We think it's a great idea, but he's just not available on those dates.
Was there one that you turned down that you maybe regretted later or wish you could have worked it out?
Honestly, the benefit of being a team for 7 or 8 years in the Budweiser era was that if we couldn't do it in 2002, we may do it in 2004 or 2005. There was very little that we said that would be great to do, and then we ended up not doing it. It was really, again, another benefit of having a sponsor that was loyal, was consistent, that had developed a long-term plan. It wasn't just, we're on this car three weekends a year and we have to do everything in that tiny time frame when our paint scheme is on the car. So I think that paid off in a lot of ways as well. Same with the team. The team was very cohesive, very similar through those years. So there wasn't a lot of turnover or new people, and so it pays off. It's and it people look at. I think about the Golden State Warriors when they were winning all the time, and people love Seth Curry and they love the Splash Brothers and all that stuff. And they were the cool team, but they also won championships. They worked hard, just like these guys did. Yeah, they were cool, but that was secondary to winning and to performing on Sundays. That's what pays the bills, and that's what these guys were hired to do.
Appearances are definitely important. Commercials kind of come up a lot too when you think about that time period. I want to know really from both of you what your favorite Budweiser commercial was from back in the day.
There were so many. In fact, this week somebody posted a couple of them online that I had forgotten about. Like they did a Mad Max commercial where Junior's driving the car through the desert, and there's all these grizzled characters on cycles and all that chasing him down, and he finally spins to a stop and he gets out and he says, just because I have Budweiser on the car doesn't mean I have Budweiser in the car. And they're like, oh, okay, sorry. And I mean, I had forgotten all about that. He did another one with this beautiful actress where she gets out of the car in his Corvette and he sees that she had left her lipstick there. So he goes on this mad dash again through the desert to try to meet, and she gets off the plane and he says, I think you forgot something. And she says, that's not mine. So it was just, there were such great ideas around those ads. And people may remember after his father died, Dale Jr. had written an essay about his father the year before. And after his father passed, we were not able to do the Budweiser commercials that we had written and planned for. His father was going to be in the Bud ads that year.
Oh, wow.
So they went to Dale and they said, we think it would be great if you want to read that about your father, and we'll do an ad. And it ran not much, only 3 or 4 times, but it was, I mean, I get emotional now thinking about it. It was, a very moody piece, but it was perfect tone for, everybody was in mourning, not just us, but all the fans. And this was Budweiser's way of working with Dale Jr. to, I don't know if soothe is the right word, but that one comes to mind as well. Even though it rarely aired, it was just perfect for its time and place at that time. So I don't know. Do you have any favorites?
That's the kind of behind the scenes that I didn't see.
Yeah,
I'm learning such stuff that you guys did.
Yeah.
When we were,
you were wrenching and we were.
What are some stories that we're missing then? Like, what are the really good stories that I don't want to let y'all go before we get to these?
Oh man,
This is a family program, right?
Yeah, we've had all kind of good stories, airplane stories. Flying the West Coast. We used to back then. We'd fly with Joey Meyer. I think he's been on the show. He was our pilot, and we had a Brasilia. And we all know it was a prop plane. We all knew where to sit because it vibrated. Like if you sat on the far right, the fourth row down, it felt like you ran a weed eater all day long.
My gosh.
So everybody knew that you'd get there. We flew in weather. Some people didn't see. Trying to land, I remember landed in Atlanta, and it was just looking snow white. And I looked out, and I was like, there's a junkyard down there. And then you look, and there's a runway, and the runway's the wrong way, and we pull up. Just tons of stories behind the scenes that that people never did get to see. Lost stories. I could just go on about them for an hours. Another one in our shop is funny. Our teammate was Steve Parks and Michael Waltrip, and they worked 7 to 4, pretty normal hours, but our hours were 7. But there was no leaving hours. Our leaving hours was when Tony Sr. would go pick the broom up. So about 5 or 6 in the afternoon, everybody would look around like, "Hey, Pops has got the broom." Okay, then you start, and that's when you go home. Wow. You didn't know when you was gonna go home. Yeah, and that was our time to leave to go home. But you had to be there at 7 o'clock next morning. But no time you didn't know. You just when Pops got that broom sweeping, it was time to go home.
What about Dale Jr.? Any stories that we need to dig out about him?
Oh,
how long do you have?
Our longest podcast yet.
Yeah. He took care of us.
Yeah.
I'm wearing glasses again at Christmas. He would give us a bonus, and then all of a sudden with that bonus, we would get a $10.99. And we were like, somebody's got to tell Junior quit doing this. $10.99's killing us. So we nominated Tony Jr. and they were saying, Dale Jr. was like, "What's a $10.99? What does that mean?" I said, "Everything you give us, and they're taking it back." He would start giving us gifts and things that he would think deep. And at Christmas, he come up to me and handed me a blank check to Dr. Christenberry to have my eyes laser cut where I didn't have to wear glasses again.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know
Tony Sr. liked Harleys, and he gave Tony Sr. a aluminum motorcycle trailer. But you wouldn't think that, but he would dig deep, and he was good to us. He took care of us, very much so.
Yeah,
very much so. You wouldn't think that part of him, but he took care of he knew we had a good group there and a tight-knit group, but he took care of us. Yep.
Jay, did you ever have to talk him into an appearance?
Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea. The funniest one that I think about is MTV. We had done a couple MTV shows, and they invited us to the Video Music Awards, and he didn't want to do it. He's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And at first, I couldn't figure out why. And finally, I had irritated him enough to say, finally get him to admit why. He says, "I don't want to go to that in a damn Mooresville suit." Like, apparently he was embarrassed by his clothes. Yeah. And that floored me that he was thinking in that manner, that he didn't want to look like he wasn't, cool or fashionable. So we arranged for a stylist, and it was the only time we ever had an outside stylist, dress him up. Because I went along, I got to wear a gaudy leather jacket as well, so it was good for me. But
do you remember what he wore?
He wore, it was, this is funny because it was before 9/11. He wore this Italian black leather jacket, and after the show, he wanted to buy it. So I called the stylist and I said, "Just let me know what that costs." And she says, "Well, after 9/11, the government was making them give all that back. Like, you couldn't just import it from Italy and then it would disappear." And he's like, "No, just find out how much." And she said, "No, really, I can't. I have to account for this to go back." So he was upset that he couldn't buy this cool leather jacket. But that was the one time we really styled him, or had went out of the way to make sure that he looked top notch at the Music Video Awards.
That's pretty cool.
That's real cool. I didn't know that.
one last question, and this doesn't really have anything to do with Budweiser, but just because y'all have kind of mentioned it in your own way about how the garage works, how the sponsorship works, I'm curious because, you hear about NASCAR now and just kind of the difficulties there, not so much of the difficulties back then when Dale Jr. raced because of his own branding. Is there anything that you would insert back into the sport to help with that, to bring back what was... And maybe you can't recreate what was, in the early 2000s. Maybe that it's just to be appreciated for what it is. But I think a lot of people out there would love to see it back to its prominence.
That's the hard part, is that Junior was the perfect personality at that time. I think NASCAR has some really good guys in there now, but some of them are just not comfortable in front of the camera, or that they're quieter, or they're just not very outgoing. So I think sometimes that's an issue, but you can't create that. You can't make someone what they're not. You can do that for a short time, but there's no way being on TV 38 weekends a year that you can hide who someone is if they're quiet or whatever. So it's not, if it were easy, they would, it would be easy to just implement. So I hate to say, well, here's the 5 things I would do. Yeah. It's very complex.
That's a tricky question.
And from a team perspective,
Very tricky question.
Yeah. Well, does this make you want to get together with like all the other Bud 8 crew guys and have a party and like reminisce again?
I'm there.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Have a, we drank Bud Lights.
Oh, well, yes.
Yeah, we drank Bud Lights. So.
Are y'all going to go to Florence? Any plans to go to Florence for the race?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I can't commit to it yet, but
I'm not sure. I checked my schedule.
Yeah.
Because I'm still doing it, for a living. So we'll see how it goes. I fly out Sunday, go to Homestead. I test Homestead this coming Monday. So tight schedule, but I would love to go.
Are you working with a specific team right now, or kind of all over?
Kind of all over. Yeah. Anything to do with Chevrolet. We support all Chevrolet race teams, so I'm doing all that. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
How about you, Jade?
I'm now writing books, so I'm old enough that the full-time travel is no longer really the allure that it once was. So been writing some books, a couple about Dale Jr., a couple about more IndyCar topics, and so that's my current love, and much better on my travel itinerary, not having to be gone.
And you've already written books on him, so these are some additional ones?
I'm still sort of juggling a couple of ideas, none of which I can really share in public, but yeah, it's something that I love doing, that I'm going to keep on doing.
Well, awesome. Well, it was really fun talking with you all today. We appreciate you joining us, and if you think of any other stories, we'll have to have you back on.
Oh, absolutely. We could go on for hours.
You better. Do you have one that's 2 or 3 hours, and then we can go through a longer list?
I think the Dale Jr. download is usually about that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Big fun.